Good morning, class. I hope you're well and your family. Karen and I are doing well. We actually get our second vaccine shot on, if all goes well, and we're scheduled for this coming Monday. And just some news, as of right now, I'm planning for us, if all are willing, to begin meeting in person in the classroom beginning the first week of March, which will be the 7th of March. So I look forward to seeing you. I'll send an email out also making sure everybody has some knowledge and some news about that. And listen, take care of yourself, be safe. I believe that all of us sometimes have needed a second chance, that because of some failure on our part or because of something that we felt that we did wrong, or that a mistake we made, that we needed somebody in our life to forgive us, to give us a second chance. And a second chance means that we get to move forward. We're able to reconcile that and make amends for it, and also just to be able to experience the relief of being forgiven. And oftentimes when someone forgives us, I know we have this great feeling of respect and appreciation and oftentimes love for that person giving us that opportunity to be forgiven, to have that second chance. And just think about in your own past where you've made a mistake and had to face the fact that you needed to be forgiven and someone was willing to do that. The relief it gives you, it gives us. And think about if the shoe's on the other foot, the relief we can give someone else if we're willing to forgive. Remember the discussion that Peter and Jesus had when Peter asked him once, how many times should I forgive? And there was sort of a standard that the Jewish faith had at the time, and Jesus said, you just continue to be willing to forgive. Don't count numbers, be willing to forgive. Our listening background today comes from Luke chapter 7, and it's a story, and really an amazing story, about a woman who encountered Jesus and ultimately was forgiven. Jesus often violated social taboos. For example, he was always reaching out to those that were considered outcasts. And it was not just confined to racial issues or race or to economics or religious. Also, he reached out to those that you and I, or the people of that time, would consider immoral people. Jesus was simply open to reaching out to all people. And it's according to the Luke chapter 7, and it's clear this woman actually was a sinner in the sense that she lived an immoral life. I don't think there's any question about that. It's written in the Gospels on more than one occasion. She was an immoral person. She was probably more than likely a Jewish prostitute. She likely considered herself to be immoral, and she probably felt like that she didn't deserve to be forgiven, and she didn't deserve to be associated with respectable people. But then one day, she meets Jesus. Maybe she heard him teaching. Maybe she saw him perform miracles. Something touched her, and something caused her to repent and to accept Jesus as her Lord. And at some point in time in her life, before, I believe, chapter 7, the verses we're going to talk about today, I think she and Jesus had a relationship, and she was forgiven and received the peace that only God can give. As we begin, it's in Luke chapter 7. We'll begin with verses 36. But this is really a dramatic story of a sinner who was broken, who needed repentance, who needed some type of change in her life. But it's also a story about someone that was forgiven, who developed an intense devotion to Jesus. The setting is a dinner party. We have the house of Simon a Pharisee, who invites Jesus to come and dine with him. And it's very normal and very customary for someone of this rabbi, of this Pharisee's position, to invite rabbis or great or famous or popular teachers into their home, to have them, to honor them, but also to learn of them, and sometimes to learn about them, to be able to discern them, to get to understand what they were trying to teach, and to understand if they were true to what they were saying. It was also socially accepted that uninvited people at a time like this type of meal, the Jewish home was open for people that were not officially invited to come and to observe the banquet, the dinner, the meal, and the discussions. The only condition was that they were not to approach the table, and they were not to be a part of the discussion. They were to be quiet. They could observe, and they were to have an understanding, maybe just to see the events, to see the things going on there. And obviously, if Jesus is going to someone's home, then people would have obviously wanted to be a part of that, to hear what he had to say. And it's interesting, beginning with the Greek culture, the classical period of the Greeks, the banquets became a setting for moral instruction, for teaching. And Jesus uses the same thing in the culture of the Palestinian area during that time. And soon Simon would get a clear teaching from Jesus. So I want to read to you Luke chapter 7, verses 36 through 43. Now one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. So he went to the Pharisee's house and inclined at the table. When a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume. And as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 men owed money to a certain moneylender. And by the way, this Pharisee could have been a moneylender. He obviously, to be able to put a meal on like this, was a man of substance. It said, well, Jesus went on to say, one owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. So one man owed 10 times as much as the other. Neither of them had the money to pay him back. So he counseled the debts of both. And then Jesus asked this question, now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt canceled. Jesus had already, by this time in his ministry in Galilee, had experienced many confrontations with the religious authorities, particularly Pharisees. And yet you see, even in this situation, he did not let that hinder him from interacting with them, for having the opportunity or accepting the opportunity to minister to them. And in this case, to minister to Simon, to be able to maybe make contact and have a personal interaction with Simon. Jesus remained throughout his ministry committed to reaching all people. For example, even on the cross, he reached out to a sinner. According to verse 37, it was known to the community that the woman that came in lived an immoral life. She, by all accounts, by all the people that knew her, knew that she lived a sinful life. Her presence would have been quite intolerable for a devout Jew, and particularly for a Pharisee. And the two things that you notice there, she brought perfume, and it was in an alabaster jar. Now, it was not a sin to have perfume for the Jewish people. And if you're going to have perfume, then an alabaster jar, which was a very expensive jar, was the appropriate container for that. But the fact that the perfume and the jar may have had something to do with the tools of her trade, Jesus' acceptance of that perfume and being perfumed on his feet would have aroused the religious sensitivities of most people. They would have been shocked that Jesus would allow this woman to even touch him. Adult women in that time were expected to be married and to always have their heads covered. Their hair was not to be seen. And any woman with her hair showing was automatically considered to be promiscuous. She was a sinner. Now, just think about the scenario. This house is full of people. There's Jesus there. There's the Pharisees. The religious people are there. the hierarchy maybe of all the friends of Simon and all the uninvited guests. Likely the room was full. And just imagine the scene and the risk that this woman took by entering that room. To go there, to take such a risk. I think having already had this conversation with Jesus about her sins being forgiven, I think it was just like she couldn't hold back any longer. She had to express the feeling she had for Jesus. She just said, I'm all in. So she pours out her soul regardless of what people think about it. Why? Because of the gratitude she felt. She walked in that house, I believe, in complete humility, intending no matter what people thought, to show her love and her appreciation to Jesus. Now, Simon said nothing. There's no comment in the text that says that he spoke, but Jesus knew his thoughts. Now, Simon maybe brought Jesus in to learn about him, and in that comment he said, remember he said, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. He's deciding then, well, I know who Jesus is. And I think if you see the text, Jesus is saying in between the lines, no, Simon, you really don't know who I am. You don't know me, Simon, but I know you. I know who you are. And he said, Simon said, you can't be a prophet. You can't be who you claim to be because you accepted this gift from this immoral woman. But notice how Jesus responds. Knowing the man's thoughts, Jesus, with great courtesy and restraint, just simply says to him, Simon, hey, I have something to say to you. Now, a lot of people around the banquet table could have thought, oh, we're going to have a conversation now about religion or about whatever it is that Jesus wants to talk about. We'll have just a table discussion. But Jesus has a purpose, and his purpose was to pull Simon into understanding what had just happened, what it really meant. Listen again to verses 41 and 42. And he tells a parable. He brings Simon into the parable by bringing him in by saying, 2 men owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed 500 denarii, the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back. So he counts the debt of both. Now, Simon, which of them would love him most? You notice Simon said, I suppose. And I get the feeling that was like he was hesitant, like knowing the teachings of Jesus, knowing what he knew about him. He knew that Jesus had a purpose for the parable, and he had a purpose for the question. So he's like careful, like, well, I suppose, Jesus. But he did give the right answer. The right answer was what? The one with the greatest debt. Neither one of these people, even though one owed 10 times the amount of the other, neither could pay the debt. And that would have been a serious consequence for both of them. Now listen, again, we'll read in chapter 7, verses 44 through 47. And one thing that I thought about, maybe Jesus thought that Simon, because he had invited him into his home, was open to hearing Jesus speak some spiritual truth. So Jesus applies the parable to the incident that had just happened with the sinner woman coming in, with her doing the things she did. Listen to verses 44 and through 47. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much. But he who has been forgiven little loves little. Jesus wanted Simon to understand that there's a difference between knowing spiritual truths and applying them to your everyday life, to living them out. And so he said, I want to compare, Simon, what this woman did and how I was received by you. He said, did you notice? Did you see this one? First he said, did you see this woman? Obviously he had noticed the woman. Simon saw her and recognized her immediately as what? That sinner woman that maybe lived in their community, lived in their neighborhood. She entered the room, but Jesus asked, did you see her as a real person? Did you see her as a human being? Then Jesus begins to contrast the actions of her and Simon's. Then he said, Simon, you failed to provide for me the common courtesies given to a visitor in your home. First, you gave me no water to clean my feet. You know, they walked in sandals, they walked on dusty roads. So it's very common and courteous for a visitor to come in, for a house owner or his servants to provide water and wash that guest's feet. And he said, you did not do that. You provided no water to clean my feet, but this woman wet my feet and with her tears and wiped them with her hair. And hey, Simon, you didn't kiss me on the cheeks. It was very customary in that time, and even today in the Near East, in the Middle East, for people to greet each other, for men to greet each other with a double kiss, one on each cheek. Simon did not do that. And the idea was, and the purpose of it was to show, it was an expression of welcome, of acceptance, and friendship. But the woman's actions were extraordinary. She had not stopped kissing Jesus' feet when the moment he laid at the table. And he said, Simon, you did not anoint my head with oil. To anoint a guest with oil was again a sign of respect, because the heat, men and women, particularly men's scalps would dry out. So although it was not a required courtesy, but it was a very common thing to do for those to show respect for them as they entered. Jesus, I want you to understand, was not really saying that Simon was a poor host or that Simon had somehow dishonored Jesus. He was simply pointing out what? The comparison between the two. Between the two actions of each of those people. Simon's actions and obviously the woman. Simon saw the woman as a sinner, but Jesus saw her as a woman whose sins had been forgiven. Her faith had resulted in her forgiveness. For he said, your faith, for her actions in Simon's home displayed what? This deep gratitude and love she felt for being forgiven, and showing respect and love to the Lord for the great forgiveness he had given her. The question we'd have to think about here is, did Simon think of himself as being someone in need of forgiveness? That was one of the issues that Jesus faced, I think, in his confrontations with many of the religious people. They really believed that they did not need forgiveness. If one assumes that Jesus had previously met with the woman and forgiven her, you see here in Simon's house, he reassures her. He tells her that she's been, you'll see in verses 48 through 50, that he reassures her and tells her she's forgiven, but also adds something to that statement. Listen to 48. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Jesus reassured her that her sins had been forgiven. He gave her assurance there in the middle of all those people in that crowd. But then he also said, hey, along with your forgiveness, carry with you your salvation. Your faith has saved you. Secondly, Jesus dismisses her. He said, woman, go in peace. Jesus was saying, look, no longer live in shame. Your life has changed. Live your changed life. Move on with your life. Put those things behind. But notice the question among all the others. And there are at least two different attitudes I see that would be possible in what they asked. And the question again was what? Who is this who even forgives sins? It could have been this attitude. It could have been, who does he think he is? That he could do that? Or It could have been, others thought, who has such power, or who speaks with such authority to forgive sins? It was a challenge for Simon to understand the teaching that Jesus and the point Jesus was making. And many times we too struggle with the things the Lord's trying to speak to us about. But in closing, I want to point out two important truths about this scene we saw. Even though there was a degree of a difference in a large degree difference in the guilt and the sin that we could discern here, the ability to dishonor God, there are different levels of sins. There are different. There are people that are deeper into sin, that have committed greater sins, and there are some of us that we may believe in our hearts that we have done very little sin. But the thing that is common among all men is what? The ability to dishonor God, to sin. And it's common to all flesh and blood. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that Christ is the ultimate creditor, to whom all debt, whether it's great or small, whatever is carried by any of us, it is up to Jesus. He has the prerogative to forgive. Finally, I want to close with these questions, just sort of for us to think about as a part of the lesson. How do you express your love in your relationship with Jesus? How do you express the appreciation in your love to Him? What is the most loving thing you've ever done for Him? Thirdly, do you live with peace in your soul, in your life? Do you live every day knowing you have peace with the Lord? And lastly, do you live with the confidence that you're forgiven? Listen, be in touch soon. Love you and take care of yourself. Goodbye.